Welcome back to Right on Four Corners. I'm your host, DelSheree Gladden. I'm an author of over 30 published novels and a ninth grade English teacher. And on this week's episode, I am excited. We're going to be talking to the 2020 to 2022 Albuquerque Poet Laureate, Mary Oishi. And we're going to be discussing her newest collection of poetry, Sidewalk Cruiseship. Mary, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Well, you already gave a brief introduction, but I was born in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, in Mennonite and Amish country, and my father actually was a Mennonite, but he joined the military during World War II and was excommunicated because they were a peace church. They did a conscientious objector route. And in the war, he was sent to the Pacific Theater, and after the war, he was in the occupation, and that's where he met my mother, who was a Japanese citizen. And so then he came back to Pennsylvania, and I was born in Lancaster, and then through some strange twist of fate, which we don't have time to get into, I ended up being raised by his brother and his wife, who they were the black sheep of the family because he also left the church to join her church, which was an Appalachian holiness church. And her mother and father met in the KKK. So I was raised by these very secluded, what can I say, people who were extremely racist. And it was really a kind of difficult way to grow up. And for some time I was bitter about that, but later in life I realized that I got a lot of gifts out of that, in that I know how to see people as more than a label. I also have a very deep empathy for people who are going through or are stuck in a situation that's really difficult and over which they have no control, and how to survive that. I think I just have empathy for people who are in a situation like that. And ironically, I ended up being a delegate to the UN World Conference Against Racism in 2001. I went to Durban, South Africa, and was an NGO delegate to that conference. So it was quite the journey
It
to
sounds
go
like it.
from that to what. But poetry has always been a lifeline for me. Basically, it was poetry and music and nature, those three things, really. And then many, many kind human beings who helped me in my life. Like, thank God for public school teachers. You know, I'm glad at that time that there wasn't this big homeschooling thing, because the people who raised me never went higher than the 8th grade. So I would have had a really extremely limited worldview had I been taught by them as well as lived with them. So, taught my education delivered by them. So I had some real caring teachers and a lot of mentors along the way. Even after adulthood, I had some writing mentors and people who influenced my life. So I'm hoping to pay that forward and bring a lot more people into poetry and into their own empowerment to be their authentic selves in this journey.
And what a wonderful focus. I think that's something that, especially in today's world, we get very inwardly focused on our own opinions and experiences and thoughts and expect everybody else to fall in line with that, when really what we need more of is, like you said, that empathy and compassion and being able to see other people's experiences of value and take in what we've experienced and use it for something good, whether those experiences were negative or positive. I think that's really important, to find some way to use whatever we've been through in life to try to bring something better to the world out of that. And I really applaud that attitude.
I've always been about the democratization of art because of how much it did for me. And I know there's a lot of people suffering in this world. And I think that if they would have the ability to express what they're feeling, it's very cathartic and empowering. And so when I became Poet Laureate, it was right as the pandemic was at its worst at the beginning. And so I'm kind of known as the pandemic Poet Laureate of Albuquerque, because that was raging through my entire tenure as Poet Laureate. But I proposed a project where we would meet in the libraries, and I would pick a poet who I knew who lived near the library. We have 20 public libraries here in Albuquerque. And so I thought I would pick someone near each public library to be the featured poet. And then I would be the host. And then I would invite poets in the neighborhood around the library to come and read in an open mic. That was the project that I proposed, to try to exalt the libraries, the role that they play in our society, which probably they wouldn't even be funded now if there were no libraries to start them now.
Mm-hmm.
Be socialism or something. But also to promote poetry and to show how many poets are in this city, and to really showcase everybody and bring out people who maybe write them and stick them in a drawer instead of putting them out there. And so that's what I decided to do. But then the pandemic struck between the time I proposed that project and the time that I actually was named. So I had to pivot and figure out a way to still do that without causing any kind of public health hazard. So the library's all closed. So I had poets come out and stand in front of the library and read, the featured poet, that is. And the city's TV team came out and filmed them. And then we had a virtual open mic for other people around the library. And so now it ended up being a real blessing, because the result was that poets were able to perform during the pandemic and kind of keep in touch with each other. And also, we now have an archived record of the pandemic and the poets, what poets were feeling. And not all the poems were about the pandemic, but there were a lot. And it was really it turned out to be a wonderful thing, like a great archive of the time, like a historical record. And it lives on the city's YouTube channel. Then they said, do you want to do an anthology of it? And I said, great. So I solicited all these poems. I ended up reading like 300 poems. And I put together an anthology called One Albuquerque 100 Poets. And it ended up winning the 2023 New Mexico-Arizona Book Award, which is really great. But because then all of these poets also were honored in that way, because they were now part of an award-winning anthology. And there were people who had won pushcarts and won international literary awards, and there were people who never had a poem published before, never performed a poem before. So it was great. It was just this whole cross-section, and that made my heart so glad, because I love to bring people kind of out of their seclusion as poets, pandemic or no pandemic.
Well, I think it's so interesting as we look at that time period now, some of the positives that came out of those years when the pandemic was at its worst. I think it's probably an area of time that will be studied in so many fields for quite a long time, trying to figure out all of the impacts of that. But it is interesting where we find those surprise positive benefits that, are never going to outweigh the death and trauma that was caused, but it is nice to see where we are able to find some of those aspects that changed things in a way that most of us probably wouldn't have expected, to bring people together in these unique environments and opportunities. And that is really cool that you were able to do that, and to give these poets the opportunity to make those connections and share their work when they may not have otherwise, especially during those years.
Yes, because there was so much isolation, even poets who are accustomed to doing readings, they had no outlet for that. So I got plugged into many, many readings that were virtual, that were all across the United States and even all across the English-speaking world. So I came to appreciate many, many poets I never would have heard of throughout like I said, the English-speaking world, from the United States, Canada, Ireland, New Zealand, India. So it's really been, I try to look for some positive things when you have a really adverse situation. And I realized there was a lot of mental health issues and economic issues and all sorts of things that were hard to grapple with, as well as, grief and loss. But again, art can really save you. Because to me, it's like a connection to the source of all life, whatever, it just feels to me like it's almost a spiritual exercise. I'm not religious, but I do feel like to me, like poetry is like the root of an aspen grove, it connects all of us. where we all belong to each other. And I think it's important to do that when we're so separated. It's important to see where our common humanity lies, and poetry does that for us. If I do a poem about my father, everybody had a father, so, or my mother, or whatever, or grief. Like, everybody experiences these things in life, or falling in love. I don't do so much of those anymore, but, you know, that kind of thing. So there's, we can recognize our common humanity. And that's really important, I think, and an important function of poetry and all art, really.
Absolutely. I love that about art, the connections that it forges and the ways it gives people to work through and express themselves in ways that are often hard to do verbally. And, to explain what you're feeling to someone in the middle of a difficult or really wonderful time, that can still be hard to put into words in front of someone as well. And something that struck me about the poems included in Sidewalk Cruiseship is the variety. You cover a lot of different topics, but all in a very relatable way, where we were talking a little bit before we started recording, and you mentioned, there are some that have thoughts and feelings and opinions that maybe not everybody's going to agree with, depending on their, personal beliefs and outlook. But even those that I think you take a strong stance on, it's still done in a way that you're expressing the emotions that you're feeling about that topic in a way that I felt like wasn't saying like, this is what I think and I'm right and everybody should agree with me. You have a very wonderful tone in your poems of, this is my experience and I want to share that so other people can understand a little bit better. And I really appreciated that about your poems and just the overall experience of reading this collection.
Oh, thank you for that. I think it's that having grown up with literally with the KKK, I learned to see people out of both eyes. It's not, I don't see people as a label. I really see their humanity. Somebody who I love dearly was the mother of the woman who raised me, and I have a photograph of her in her KKK uniform. But she loved me very much. A lot of it was just, she was just very sheltered. She grew up in a town with, lucky if it had 200 people. It wasn't even on a Pennsylvania map. And it was up in the Appalachian Mountains, and she never had a car. She never had a television or even a radio. No indoor bathroom. She was very, very poor and very, very uneducated. But she was a loving person, really. She had no idea what the Klan really stood for. Because I asked her one day, I said, don't you know, how could you be in that? Once I learned what it really was, I said, don't you know they hate people like me? And she said, oh, no such a thing. And I really think that she genuinely loved me her whole life. And so I try to see people as, at their core, as wanting to be loving beings. They're often brainwashed or misinformed. And it's not just white supremacists that I can see that, even though they can be very scary and hateful. Some of them are violent and hateful. And there's no doubt about that. And I never condone violence from any quarters. But I hope that my poetry reflects that. I don't have a feeling like I'm preaching to people. It's like, I don't know all the truth. My life was a journey out of ignorance and misinformation and brainwashing into, I had to kind of reconnect to my Japanese heritage, my maternal heritage. And fortunately, I've been to Japan twice. And so, and I got to know my mother before she passed. We became very close the last 2 years of her life. And the fact that I started from such a deficit was really a plus, because I had to learn a whole lot. I had to be really curious and really open and really love human beings, in order to get to the place where I am now. And to get past the bitterness of what I experienced when I was younger, thinking, how could I, how they say that, some people say that you had a contract before you came to Earth and you selected your parents and your situation. I always joke that, if that's the case, I should have had a lawyer look over my contract before I came. But really, truly, I can see the positives. I can see how I benefited. And therefore, I want those things that I experienced and came through to kind of give hope to other people who are stuck in situations like I do have a lot of Albuquerque. We have some beautiful people here, wonderful people. And we also have some people who are very, very damaged. And so when I go around the city, I see people like that, and my heart, it's like they come into my heart, and I have to write about them. So I don't know if you want to hear one of my poems from the book, but
Absolutely. Yeah. What you just said reminded me of, I was looking for the name of it. You talk about the different ghosts that are in
Ghost
that
Town.
area. Yeah. And
Okay.
that one was one that I found really intriguing because it makes that point of the people who make up a community that we often don't see, don't pay attention to. Yeah. If you'd like to do that one, that would be wonderful.
Okay. Ghost Town. This town is coming like a ghost town was the song that kept singing in an Albuquerque adopted son's head, louder and too loud for the silence downtown as he walked deserted streets past boarded up windows. He took a few pictures, a truck turning left with no one in the crosswalk, or the sidewalks either for that matter, except the son with a song in his head and one unhoused man curled up in his dirty blue blanket in an alcove, his few belongings nearby, a water bottle and a backpack in the corner near his head, already half ghost. One shop owner, windows intact, has painted on them the face of George Floyd. Black Lives Matter, #Justice for George Floyd is the caption. It's more of a chant than a song, but yeah, I can see how your inside ears would sing, "This town is coming like a ghost town." Another picture on the strip, one lone lowrider, red lights in the grill, a few blocks down, a chopper all stretched out, yellow, chrome, and attitude. Other than that, not much sign of life. Albuquerque's adopted son is feeling deep despair. I doubt he ever took the Old Town Ghost Tour. Back when things were open all the time, he wasn't a tourist. This is his home. Who needs a ghost tour? Ghosts in every neighborhood, hiding in the volcanoes, ghosts everywhere. In the university ghetto, an alcoholic found 3 days later in her bedroom dead. Now she's refusing to leave, lighting all the candles, turning on the stereo at 3 a.m. She's determined to get somebody's attention. La Llorona? You'll have to ask the ones born here about her. I can tell you since I arrived, one ghost runs down Zuni, looking for an unlocked car to spend the night, looking over her shoulder for that one cop who turned off his lapel camera. Friends keep building her memorials by the wall at the trailer park near where she went down, before Zuni bends back to Central. They keep building over and over, but they keep being torn down until they finally give up. This ghost, not on the Old Town Ghost Tour, too far removed, nor the ghost with the black gloves, los guantes negros, holding a shovel, wishing he had answered his daughter's calls so that no wellness-turned-death call had followed. Nor is the ghost on the hill near the manicured neighbors just under the mountain, the ones with the magnificent westward views. He wasn't well. He wasn't to be reasoned with. He didn't belong here, so the cops were called. This town is coming like a ghost town. Yes, it's a ghost town. Spirits that go back more than 300 years, long before this country ever breathed its name. Didn't you see that sign on your last picture? It says, "Some tears become flames." Don't despair, son. That's Albuquerque talking, and she damn well knows what she's talking about.
Thank you. I think one of the reasons that particular poem stood out to me so much was, for one, its descriptive nature and its narrative in part. It's not telling a complete story, with a traditional arc, but it's giving this look at this town that has so many pieces and parts to it, so many people who are part of the town, part of the community, but who are also not because of the way they're viewed and treated. And it had such a sense of place that I'm familiar with Albuquerque, so I could imagine some of what you're talking about. But I think even someone who has not been to Albuquerque could feel themselves in that environment. And it brings up a lot of compassion for the people that you're describing and the lives that they're living. And that sense of what are we ignoring on an everyday basis and not taking that time to notice and make those connections.
Yeah, and for a while we were under some kind of an order from the Justice Department based on the police brutality here, and I just felt like that was kind of an important thing to bring to the fore without directly talking about it, but yet showing the results of it. And we have, I think, just recently met the criteria for coming out from under that order. I think the current mayor really worked on that aspect to monitor that. But that, I think we poets are truth tellers. We can't pretend. We're not propagandists. We have to say what is, and that's our role. And sometimes I used to think of myself kind of like sitting on a ledge overlooking, what's going on and kind of surveying it and studying it, like, sitting a little bit removed and yet really, really plugged in, and I think that's what our role is as poets, is to tell the absolute truth and to tell it in a way that people can hear it and receive it. So that was pretty much a commentary on what the part that most people don't want to look at or don't want to talk about, but it's very real for so many people.
Yeah, I mean, that's the everyday experience for so many members of society across the country, and I'm sure throughout the world as well. But how many of us pay attention to that on a day-to-day basis, or, have that sense of what can be done or how can things improve? I think that's been coming to light a little bit more in American society as more has been shown. I think that's one thing. Social media definitely has its pluses and minuses. But
Right.
the awareness that can happen when it's used responsibly, and making more people aware of some of these things that are happening, which in decades past, it's not like it wasn't happening. It just wasn't out there for people to know about the corruption or the brutality or the way that people were just swept out of the way when they were inconvenient or not wanted in a city. So I think on that side, it's good that we're seeing more of it and we're being asked as people in today's world to do something about it rather than to just ignore it.
Well, and I think another thing is, for most of my life, you weren't able to just pull out a phone and record somebody. And I think that has been a real shift. So there's the internet where you can share things instantly and it can go viral, where within minutes, a couple 100,000 people can see something, or maybe even 1 million people. But, we didn't have that ability before. If the news media didn't cover the civil rights movement, we never would have known about it anywhere outside of the South. So it's kind of amazing how the coverage of current events has been democratized as well. That we're able to share. I mean, if someone hadn't recorded what happened to George Floyd, we never would have known it, outside of the people on that street corner. So I think that's really a pretty amazing thing. And it has enabled a lot of consciousness raising, in a way, to use an old feminist term. But I think that's been really able to galvanize people. Even the anti-war protests back when George W. Bush was the president. And that was the first time we had a global preemptive anti-war demonstrations. That's the first time that ever occurred. And it was on every continent, even in Antarctica. Few people, scientists who were there protested. So it was on every inhabited continent simultaneously, the same day. That's unprecedented. But this is the boon of having the internet and having access to sharing information so rapidly.
Absolutely. And I think that that does give hope. And I know that was something you wanted. You cover a lot of topics in the collection that bring up some of the issues of today's society, but you also look for those positives and look for that hope. And would you like to share a prophecy with us now?
Oh, sure.
That'd be wonderful.
Prophecy. A Dene poet, mother, multimedia artist told me today that according to the indigenous calendar, we're about to leave what she calls hell cycles, enter the cycle she and her people call heaven, when the Pleiades is directly overhead. It will get worse before it gets better, but by 2038, the mixed people, and look at us, we're all mixed, the mixed people will take us back to living with the earth again. So says the prophecy, she said, smiling down at her boy. So says the prophecy, rebeats my weary heart, weary of the cycles of pandemic hell, conspiracy hell, of mass shootings hell, of history erasing hell, hell after hell. But so says the prophecy. So says the prophecy carries me like a refrain, glowing, warming my winter heart, waiting for the mixed grandchild who will bring heaven to earth for me this year, no matter where the Pleiades appears on the night of her birth. Perhaps she will help take us back. Perhaps by 2038, she and all the mixed peoples of earth will usher in the heaven cycles. At least, so says the prophecy. Who am I to disbelieve?
Thank you for sharing that. I think that is a great note to start to wrap up on, because I looked at the time, we're already at that point, which
Okay.
always went super fast. But I really loved that poem because, like you said, it is hopeful. It does remind us that these things do go in cycles. We're having a lot of strife, a lot of anger and hatred and war and everything that's going on in the world right now. And it can be very overwhelming. But we as a people, we're going to keep moving forward. Hopefully more of us than not are going to be looking for those positives and working to make those improvements as we go forward. And there is that next cycle that's going to come. It's not going to stay in that one place. Just like getting through that pandemic and, we're on to the next thing and dealing with all of that, but we're going to keep moving through it and we're going to find those better times.
Right, and we can't despair. We can't give up. Our ancestors didn't give up. We can't either. For the sake of the children and the grandchildren and all the future generations, we just can't give up. We have to do what our ancestors did and keep hope and keep working toward the good things.
Absolutely.
For everybody.
Well, and I wanted, before we finish off, Mary, where can people find you online and stay up to date on your work and everything that you're doing?
Well, I am on Facebook, and it's just my Facebook, Mary Oishi, O-I-S, like Sam, H-I. I don't have my website up yet. I have the name, but I don't have it. I let it lapse, and so I need to redo it, bring it up to date. But also, I have an author bio on Amazon. So if you look up Sidewalk Cruiseship, you can just click on my name and it will give you information. And I will keep putting up any books that I write in the future, which I have several kind of in the pipeline, so they can see about it there.
Awesome.
I prefer they buy the book from the local bookstore if they can, but you can order it. But at least you can see what I'm about there.
Yeah. Well, and I'd love to stay in contact about your future projects and chat with you again when you're ready. Just remind our listeners that the collection we talked about today is Sidewalk Cruiseship by Mary Oishi, who's our former Albuquerque Poet Laureate. Mary, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today.
Thank you for having me.